Welcome to the 16th episode of Nature Aventure Survie, the podcast.
Nature Survie.
This is the final part of our interview with Paul Kirtley, who is a bushcraft instructor at Frontier Bushcraft. We talk about gear, what kind of gear should you take to the field. Paul will also give us some pieces of advice about books, bushcraft books, that you can read to increase your knowledge.
Savant, nous allons finir par mourir de soif sur ce fichu rafio.
Si ça continue, capitaine, nous serons bientôt au régime du docteur Bombard.
Ouais.
Wilson! Wilson!
Yeah, and you said it well. You have to train with your gear, and that reminds me of some survival kits that I've seen, where you can unpack the survival kit, but the container is made of paracord, for example, and you are just unable to pack it back in the same way.
Yes.
So that's a pity. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I've also, I've had people on courses who have asked me, do I have some spare paracord? And they're wearing a paracord bracelet. And I say, well, you have a paracord bracelet. And they say, well, yes, but it's so difficult to put it back together again. I don't want to use it. And I know they're not in a survival situation, but, it's another example of, people carry these things, but they don't ever use them. And in some ways, they're quite impractical. And I think the most important thing is familiarity. If you're going to take any equipment to serve a particular purpose, it's familiarity with that equipment, and particularly if you're dealing with stressful situations. And so when you're talking about survival equipment, it's inevitably going to be a stressful situation. As we've already discussed, a lot of success or failure in survival is about psychology. And you've probably heard the podcast when I interviewed Sarita Robinson, who is a lecturer in survival psychology at one of the British universities, University of Central Lancashire. And we had a long discussion about the psychology of these situations. And it's not just about, people think of survival situations as, the classic, you've suddenly somehow materialized in the wilderness and you have to build a shelter and light a fire. And yeah, that happens to some people. You find yourself stranded in a wilderness and you have to apply those skills. But a survival situation is, a plane crash. A survival situation is a helicopter landing in water. A survival situation is a car going into a river and you having to get out of it. And unless you are very, very familiar with the equipment, and unless you're familiar with having practiced with certain equipment, most people don't perform very well in using it. So that's why, people who are in helicopters regularly, they give them training in special facilities so they know what to do when the helicopter lands in water and the compartment fills up with water and it might turn upside down. They have trained to get out of the helicopter. And so, typically, for example, in the North Sea, people who are being flown out to oil rigs by helicopter, they've all had training on what to do if the helicopter ditches into the sea, and it saves lives. So it's not just an academic knowledge of what to do, they've actually practiced it. I used to teach jiu-jitsu, and I trained in jiu-jitsu for many years. You can show a yellow belt, for example, so somebody who is quite new to the art, a particular technique, and they can perform it reasonably well in the dojo. If you just say, could you practice this with your training partner? They're not particularly fluid, but they're doing the basic motions. As soon as you put them under any pressure, it completely falls apart. And it's the same, as you go up through the grades, that basic skill becomes more ingrained. They become more familiar with it. They've applied it in different circumstances. They've applied it on people of different size, different height, different weight. And they start to own that skill set, and then when they get to their brown belt grading or their black belt grading, and they're being tested in a very demanding way, and things are very, very unexpected, they can react to it and use the appropriate technique. But that takes years of training. And it's the same with many things, that the more familiar you are, the more practiced you are, the more times you've used it, the better you'll be able to apply it when you're stressed, because it becomes automatic.
And you talked about a machete before. That reminds me of my last courses, where there was a military soldier who attended the courses, and we were in Brittany, in France. The main goal was lighting a fire and natural navigation, and he was with a Bear Grylls machete that is about 50 centimeters.
Oh yes, I know.
And,
yes.
and I said to him gently that it wasn't needed for the courses. I didn't want him to get angry.
Yes, yeah.
That's really a merchandising thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a combination of things. I mean, you have this stuff that's been merchandised, you know, and I've seen those machetes. I know the ones you mean. I've seen them for sale in shops in the Lake District in the UK, which is largely it's a very nice lake and mountain area, and there are many. I see my wife is in love with this region. Yes. No, it's fantastic. It's beautiful. It's very compact. There's a lot of history there as well, in terms of, Wordsworth, for example, one of the British poets, is synonymous with that area, and there's a lot of culture and history around there, and it's a beautiful area, and there's lots of activities, from mountain biking to hiking to canoeing to do there, but there's nothing really that you're going to need to apply a machete to, and yet you go into an outdoor store and there's pen knives, and then there are the Gerber Bear Grylls survival knives and the machete, and okay, somebody might be going traveling further afield, but all of this stuff is being sold. Very, very few people are going to be going to a tropical environment where they need a large cutting tool, who happen to be shopping in Keswick or Ambleside in the Lake District that particular day. So it is pushing equipment out to people that they don't generally need. And then also, you mentioned the quality as well. The quality of some of these things is very poor. The steel is soft. It doesn't hold an edge. It's not designed to do jobs particularly efficiently. It's designed more to attract people in the shop. And it's rubbish, a lot of the stuff that gets sold as survival equipment.
The first ferro rod that I bought was a Bear Grylls one, and the sticks went out of the handle. So it just talked for itself.
Yes.
I think this is rubbish. Yeah. So in your opinion, what is the minimum amount of gear that is needed to start bushcraft?
Well, assuming that you own some clothes, which most people do, I think, as I say, going back to my sort of central definition of bushcraft, it's about knowledge of nature, it's about practical application of that knowledge. I think you struggle to apply the basic skills if you don't have some sort of knife. I think that's probably your key tool. It doesn't need to be a big knife. You certainly don't need a machete. And I would caveat, though, if you're listening to this in Malaysia or Indonesia or Northern Australia or the Philippines, then I would say your main tool is a machete or a parang. But a cutting tool that's appropriate to your environment. And for most people, they're sort of, if you think about it being a little bit like layers of the onion, pretty much any environment, a small fixed-bladed knife is going to be valuable to you, whether you're in the northern forests of, the boreal forest of Canada or northern Scandinavia, or whether you're in the south of Australia or on a hike in Tasmania or New Zealand. Pretty much anywhere other than Antarctica or Greenland, although even Greenland actually, most places a small fixed-bladed knife is going to be useful to you. So I would say that's kind of like a core piece of equipment for most people. I always recommend people to start off with just by getting one of the Mora knives, the Mora clippers, the Mora companion knife. They're very inexpensive. And you can the steel is reasonably good quality. You can keep a good edge on them. People can learn to sharpen. People can learn carving. People can fashion everything from bow drill sets to feather sticks to spoons. All of those things where you're actually needing to craft something, you can do with those knives. So, and it's hard to do it without a knife at all. And people who have the romantic idea that they'll go out and find some flint, and that's a whole skill set in itself. In terms of flint knapping, that's quite a specialist skill. It's harder to learn than most of the basic bushcraft skills, and then your chances of finding an appropriate piece of flint or similar material on the surface that somebody hasn't already found is very low. Even in the Mesolithic in the UK, there were mines where people were digging flint out, and one of the famous areas is Grimes Graves, which is on the border between Norfolk and Suffolk in the east of the UK, in East Anglia. And it's an interesting place to visit because you can still see where they dug into the ground, and then they've filled those holes back in again with the rubble from digging the new holes. And some of those holes have been excavated, and you can see it's like a little mine, where they dug down and then they dug out into the seams of flint, and that flint has been found widely. There was clearly trade networks, and it's been found in the north of Scotland, it's been found further afield. So that was something that people were specializing in extracting in a particular place, and then it was being traded for, and this is thousands of years ago. This is sort of 4,000 years ago. So they knew that they weren't just going to go out and find a piece of flint kicking around in the ground that was going to be suitable. Your chances of doing so now are even less. So just get away from that romantic idea that you need nothing. What you really need is a good, simple cutting tool that's not too big, that you can carve with, not something that you need to hack and smash through bamboo and those sorts of things. Most of the time you just need to carve a spoon, or make feather sticks, or cut tent pegs, or make pot hangers, or all the campcraft, woodcraft type of jobs. A decent little sharp knife that will go on your belt is all that you need, really. And I think that's the key thing that you need, really, to start your bushcraft skill. And then I think one of the things that people find hard initially is friction firelighting, whether it's bow drill or hand drill, and that's certainly something to work up to. But if you want to light fires and use more natural materials, then I would say get a ferro rod as well. And yes, you're choosing to take some equipment with you, but we've had that conversation already. And once you have that, once you go beyond just using a cigarette lighter or matches and start dropping sparks onto different natural materials, so I'm not talking about dropping sparks onto cotton wool or hexamine blocks or any man-made material. I'm talking about facilitating the learning process, where you're going to go out, you're going to find some natural materials, and then you're going to have to make sure it's in the right condition, and maybe prepare it such that you can drop a small spark onto it and get flame, and then you need to take that flame and establish a fire with it. That's a really good way of learning lots of different fire skills. And particularly if you vary the material that you're dropping sparks onto, you're going to get a very, very good baseline fire lighting skill set, which will then dovetail, it will fit very nicely once you start to learn the friction fire lighting skills, if you want to learn those skills, because then you've already got that foundation. You know how to take a small flame to a larger flame, you know how to take a really small flame into an established fire. That's invaluable once you get to the point of taking some sticks, rubbing them together, generating an ember, and then having to take that ember into a small flame, and then that small flame onto a fire. You've already got part of that process really well practiced. So that to me would be, if you're going to buy two things, buy a Mora knife and buy a ferro rod. They'll probably cost you £20, €30 maybe, and you have everything that you need that you don't already have. If you're somebody who already has some outdoor clothing, That's all you need, to start actually learning the skills. And clearly, if you want to camp out, you need some camping equipment, but that's, to me, is a separate thing from the actual bushcraft. To me, the bushcraft skills are about the interaction with the natural resources and learning how to use them. And for that, really, a knife and a ferro rod will take you a very long way.
So these are the last questions.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to be lost in an unknown, remote location, what is the only tool you'll want to have?
It would be a strong knife. It would be something stronger than the Mora knife, which I just recommended. So something that has a full tang. So for people that are not familiar with what that means, so where the blade goes all the way into the handle, and preferably where that part of the blade is as wide as the rest of the handle, so that even if part of the handle breaks, you can still hold the knife, you can still improvise. So it's highly, highly unlikely that anything you can do with that knife, including batoning, would break it, and therefore it's 100% reliable. That would be my number one tool. If in a general sense, because there are many, many environments where that would be invaluable. It's very, very hard to improvise, as we've already discussed with a discussion about flint and flint knapping, and that would be my, if I had a choice in the northern forest or tropical areas, I would vary the cutting tool, but if I had to choose one cutting tool for any environment, that would be it. That would be the number one tool for me.
Okay, you teach bushcraft and at the Frontier Bushcraft School
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of people throughout the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Any chance you'll come to France one day?
Well, it's possible. If I was invited, I'd be open to running a seminar or running something. I don't think we're going to set up Frontier Bushcraft France, to be honest with you, but it's a short journey across the channel to get to France, and I'd be happy to come and run a workshop or a seminar for somebody if that worked for all parties. My French is not good enough to teach bushcraft in French, so that might be a little bit of an impediment, but
I could be your translator.
Yes, you could be my translator. Yes, yeah, that would work. And we do get people. It's interesting, Frontier Bushcraft is based in the UK, and we do run some expeditions in other parts of the world. But also, interestingly, we have a good number of customers who come from Europe. We have people who come from Holland or Netherlands in particular, but also Germany, Italy. I'm trying to think if we've ever had anybody come from France. I'm not sure that we have, but we have had quite a few customers from Spain as well. Where else do we have? Slovakia. We've had a few customers. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And going back to what you were saying, I think in Europe there isn't so much bushcraft taught. If there is any of these sorts of skills taught, they're taught under the umbrella of survival with a different emphasis. And I think it's interesting that there's still a growing interest in the bushcraft skills, and it's clearly what you're finding as well, that you're finding people are interested in the bushcraft skills in France.
I'll see if I can invite you one day.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to. Yeah.
Do you have any book to recommend?
Any books? General bushcraft books, do you mean? Or?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think the number one for me is Mors Kahansky's bushcraft book. Particularly, his focus was on the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, he did write it from a perspective of being based in Alberta in Canada, but the species that he covers, as well as the general techniques that he covers, are very widely applicable. Richard Graves' book, which was an Australian. It was originally a set of pamphlets that were, I think there were 10 pamphlets, and it was ultimately combined into a book. That was called Bushcraft, and you can still get hold of that as a second-hand book, and that's worth getting hold of. That's why Mors Kahansky's book originally was called Northern Bushcraft, because he wrote it as a kind of Northern Hemisphere version of Richard Graves' Southern Hemisphere book. So if you've got those two books, then you've kind of got a really good basis for southern and northern hemisphere bushcraft. And so they would be my two recommendations. And then if people are more interested in the survival side of things, Lofty Wiseman's Survival Handbook, the SAS Survival Handbook, is always very, very good. I would recommend people to buy the larger version. You can get a very compact version. I would buy the larger book because it's just bigger. It's not so condensed. And then there's also another good wilderness survival book by Greg Davenport, who was a US Air Force survival instructor, and that's called Wilderness Survival Skills. Let me just check. It's on my shelf here. Let me just get the title exactly right. The author is definitely Greg Davenport, and yeah, it's just Wilderness Survival. Yeah, it's just called Wilderness Survival, and that's a good book as well. And that also crosses over nicely with some of the bushcraft skills as well. So in terms of the survival books, those would be my top two recommendations there. And for people who are beginning in these skills, if you master everything in those books, it will take you many years. So that don't be too busy with buying lots and lots and lots of books. If you get those books and you really work on the skills there, that will take you very, very far. And then after that, the things that you probably want to go to look at are field guides for trees and plants for the area where you're living, so that you can learn how to identify the useful trees and plants in your area, and so that would be the next recommendation once I got past those basic books. Mm-hmm.
So in order to finish, can you tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet, in the media?
Yeah, absolutely. Frontier Bushcraft is my bushcraft school, and that's where the courses and trips are, and that's frontierbushcraft.com, and people can certainly find me there. They should also check out my blog, which is at paulkirtley.co.uk, so .co.uk, not .com. And also please say hi on Twitter at pkirt, that's PKIRT, that's Papa Kilo Indigo India Romeo Tango, pkirt. Say hi on Twitter. That's always, I'm always posting stuff on there as well. So they're the main places. And if you contact me via Twitter or the contact form on my blog, I will respond. If people have got questions, always happy to hear from people.
Yeah, and you also have a Facebook page and Instagram.
Yeah, account. I do. Yeah. So if you go to my blog, paulkirtley.co.uk, in the sidebar is a link to all of those places. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube channel as well. That's linked all from my blog. Just on the sidebar, you can see the icons. It's always nice to hear from people on Instagram as well. I'm really enjoying Instagram at the moment. It's people are posting some really nice stuff on there. So people can find me on Instagram very easily as well, and see what I'm posting on there. I don't post a huge amount, 1 or 2 photographs maybe every day, but they're always about what I'm doing in the outdoors. So if people want to follow me, what I'm doing every day, and as I do things in the outdoors, so that's a good way of following. And then on my blog is larger articles and videos about trips and how-tos on skills and whatnot as well. So
okay, so thank you, Paul. It was a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Mine too. No, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience, and hopefully people get some value from that. And as I say, if people have questions, I'm always happy to hear from people.
Yeah, and of course you have your podcast too, and your videos where people can ask you questions.
Yes, I have the Ask Paul Kirtley series now, which is primarily a video series, but we also release it as a podcast. And people can send me questions by email or by Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag Ask Paul Kirtley. And I will do my best to answer those on the shows. And we put one of those out every week now, and they seem to be very popular. I keep getting lots of questions, so it's good.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Wilson!
A huge thank you to Paul Kirtley, who is a bushcraft instructor at Frontier Bushcraft. You can find him on his blog, paulkirtley.co.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a feedback. You can reach us on our YouTube channel. You can reach us on our Facebook page, Nature Aventure Survie, even on Twitter or Instagram at NAS Survie. You can visit our blog, natureaventuresurvie.blogspot.fr. Have a good day, have a good bushcraft.